You're not a history nerd. You're just obsessed with war.
No, I'm not obsessed with war, but I am obsessed with the fact that pre 1965, which is before the PKI purge of 1965, there were a lot of folk dances that would be held in like different villages, and especially in East Java, where it was usually the norm to hold like public gatherings of dances after panen or after the harvest. But then after 1965, there was a literal deficit of seniman in East Java because a lot of the seniman, especially those that were affiliated with Lekrau, was put to jail and abused, and they still hold that stigma with them even after they were released. And then that in turn reflected to the dances that they were supposed to know. I mean, these people would have been maestros at this moment. Like, they hold the collective memory of what those dances looks like. And I think if you're a dancer, you would know that your dance teacher holds the memories of all of those choreographies in their head, and like you don't really know how they know, but they just do. And then after pre 1965, because they were put to jail, there was a deficit, or there was this like knowledge vacuum of all of these different dances that they don't know how it's supposed to look like, or it's just a little bit different. These dances are particularly like the sandur, the lengger. Most of them come from East Java. And like in particular the sandur, there was no sandur performances until after like 1970s or in the 1980s. And even then, the first time sandur was performed again, it was under military surveillance. And now a lot of Seniman are trying to reconnect all of the collective memories as well as the original choreography of how the dances would have looked like pre-1965. And I think it's crazy that we might never understand or never comprehend the full impact of these choreographies, and it will always be a little bit missing in terms of like their energy, because the Seniman that tried to preserve them was targeted as enemies of the state. And it's such a shame because Indonesian culture, Indonesian history is so rooted in our cultural practices, and especially our traditional ways of storytelling, and dancing is one of them. And as a traditional dancer, this hits home because I know for a fact if we don't hurry up and digitize a lot of the choreography that is memorized by our current maestros, we might never know or understand that there were these dances to begin with. And like to know that there are already dances and traditional performances that will never see the light of day because of 1965. That's why we should always be accountable of our own history, because when we try to understand our own collective trauma of what happened in the past, then we can go forward in the future with a better understanding of what we should not do and repeat.
I do not like the song. Santa Claus is coming to town. Do not come to my town.
You know that there was once a Balinese dance performance that was so phenomenal that it blew the minds of the Europeans who watched it, to a point where it completely changed the way Europeans saw Indonesian performance art? These are the Balinese dancers that came and performed at the 1931 International Colonial Exhibition, and they accidentally changed the way European imperialistic colonizers saw Dutch East Indies culture. Dutch East Indies people. So the Paris 1931 colonial exhibition was effed up. If this flyer makes you feel uncomfortable, that's good. That's a good sign. Basically what they did was they had a lot of these imperial powers like the French, the Dutch, Belgium, Portugal, Italy. They all participated in this, and they basically made small little pavilions for all of the people that they were colonizing. What the hell? These were exhibitions of like exotic populations. It was basically a human zoo. The Dutch created a Dutch pavilion, and they brought in people from Dutch East Indies or Indonesia. They created this like basically Balinese village, and the performers stayed here. There was so much drama. At one point there was a fire, and lots of historical and cultural artifacts actually got lost in the fire, which is so sad because it's something that we will never know the significance of because it was lost in a fire. Anyways, these dancers were already like top ticket, right? People already wanted to see them because they were so exotic. Didn't help the fact that upon their arrival, they were described as Javanese. two completely separate indigenous tribes. On June 18th, the dancers made their first performance, and it blew these white people's minds. There was a headline in one of the local newspapers, and it reads, "Who would not be curious to see these women whose type of beauty is the pure Aryan race from which we come from? Do Balinese women deserve their reputation as the prettiest woman in the world?" What the fuck? And there was a lot of like that colonial speak. There was also another headline that said "The Colonial 1001 Nights," referring to their performances. So this troupe of dancers was basically led by this creative director. His name was Chokarda Gederaka Sokawati. He was a local kind of leader at the time, and he essentially was the one that was curating a lot of the performances that ended up being performed to these colonizers. These white people loved these Balinese dances so much that they ended up getting 3 permanent slots for performance within Paris. These performances really sparked a very intense interest in Balinese culture and Balinese dances. They'd never seen a performance of a dance that was non-verbal, because at the time Western theater was very verbally heavy, and if you see a Balinese dance now, everything is within gesture. The song indicates how fast the dancer moves or how soft their movements are, and everything dances. The press called them a spectacle of the highest aesthetic value and of unforgettable beauty. What's funny and ironic is that the dances that were picked to be showcased within the exhibition were finally curated because they knew what worked well for the white audiences. Like in the beginning of the 1920s, a lot of foreign tourists had already came to Balinese hotels, and they knew what resonated with these Western audiences. And one of the performers, his name was Madela Bah, and he was quoted as saying, "We brought with us legong, topeng, baris, jangan, and the barong because Europeans cannot bear it unless performance is short and varied." Clocked. The reason why it was such a big deal for these white people to see these Balinese dancers is because they really didn't think that indigenous or like exotic cultures were civilized. They were gagged, sis. They were gagged that these indigenous people from a small island in the Dutch East Indies served such culture, such finesse, such incredible theatrical performances, where they thought, or they believed at the time, that these colonized people were uncivilized. One of the people that were gagged was this guy called Antonin Artaud, and I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Anyway, he was a columnist and he wrote lots of theatrical theories, and essentially he made a theory that changed the way that Western theater was made. He catapulted this idea of like theater should be all encompassing, and it needs to like not just be verbal, it also needs to have lots of surreal sound. The audience also needed to feel something when you're performing, so it inspired him. There was also this movie that was made and released in the same year, 1931, made by Armand Dennis and Andre Roosevelt. And it's like a love triangle between a prince of royal Bali blood and a coolie, and they both fall in love with Destiny, a slave girl possessing the sensuous charms for which the women of Bali are known to have. What the fuck? For better or for worse, the 1931 colonial exhibition, where these Balinese dancers danced their asses off, changed the way Western society viewed Dutch East Indies and especially Bali. And it just goes to show the importance of preserving our traditional way of theater, whether it be gamelan or budoyo or any type of cultural art, because it informs people who we are, where we come from, and our very unique story. In that note, happy International Dance Day!